Hey guys, welcome back. Steve Ramsey over at Woodworking for Mere Mortals and Alex Harris at Thiswoodwork had an idea. The idea was for us all to build something that represents the area in which we live. I'm from Wisconsin, and a lot of things come to mind for Wisconsinites. Breweries, the dairy industry, or even a Super Bowl football team. But what did I make? Paper. Wisconsin's the #1 paper producing state in all the U.S. We employ over 150,000 people in the paper making industry alone. So, if you want to see how paper is made, stay tuned. I had some pine kicking around the shop that measured approximately 2 inches wide by 3/4 inches thick. I took it over to the miter saw to make 45-degree cuts on some of the pieces so I could make 2 frames, one slightly larger than the other. I then took all 8 pieces over to a table, covered it with wax paper, and began to glue them up. These strap clamps are really great for gluing up mitered joints. Once I had all the pieces aligned, I tightened it up. I repeated the same process with the smaller frame. I then took both frames over to the belt sander to clean them up a little bit and remove some of the glue. If you don't have a power sander, you can always use a block of wood and some sandpaper. When I was at the fabric store looking for different types of fabric to use, I found one that was called tulle. Being I like tools so much, this had to be the right stuff. Then I worked on stretching the tulle over the frame, stapling it in place as I went. The holes in the tulle seemed a little bit too big, so I doubled up the fabric. I then began to stretch it over the frame to make sure there were no wrinkles and that it was nice and tight. I went around my shop looking for wood dust and wood shavings off of some of my tools. I gathered it up and put it in a container. Some of it was pine, maple, walnut, some of the sawdust being from the exact frames I was working on. Once I had my container of sawdust, I brought it into the house and cut up some cardboard and sheets of paper. That was going to be my recycling part. I added the wood scraps and paper together and then added hot water. Then I stuck it in the blender for about 5 minutes. I had to add a little bit of water. Then, in a shallow pan of water, I put the larger frame on the bottom, and then the top frame without any fabric on it acted as a guide. The guide didn't really hold it to a rectangle very well, but that's alright. I then flipped over the screen and patted out most of the moisture. Using a couple dry microfiber cloths and a rolling pin, I was able to get out most of the water. Although damp and still delicate, it was holding together quite nice. After making half a dozen sheets or so, I set them off to dry. When gluing up the mitered frames, I only let the glue set for about an hour. This would be fine if I was making a picture frame, but then I wanted to submerge the pieces in water, which ended up softening the glue and warping the wood slightly. So I had a couple gaps at the miters. You can see the gaps here and here. It was then time to remove the staples and the fabric. To correct where the joints had separated, I took the frame over to the miter saw. Being the joints that separated were kitty corner from one another, I just cut the bad joints out and then glued the two pieces back together. So it was back to the glue up. My strap clamp got one more use for today. I then put in a rabbeting bit with a bearing into the router table and cut a rabbet onto the back of the larger frame. When routing rabbets on the inside of a picture frame, it leaves rounded corners, which I squared up with a chisel. I also took an 1/8 inch round over bit on the inside and outside edges of the front of the picture frame. I used a chisel to clean up the inside corners. I then sanded it smooth, and then I had to choose between a brown stain and an ebony stain. Ebony won out. I've never used ebony stain before, and what I was thinking was it wasn't going to be super dark. You'd still be able to see a little bit of the grain through it. Turns out I was a little bit wrong. It was actually a lot lighter than I had even thought. Even after reapplying the stain, it still turned out pretty light. Once I had all the stain wiped off, it was time to spray on some lacquer. I normally spray on 2 light coats about 10 to 15 minutes apart. Then I sand it with a 320 grit foam pad and add 3 to 4 more coats. Then I picked which sheet of paper I wanted to use. I got some glass from my local glass supplier. The paper it actually came in was kind of a neat maroon or burgundy color. I was going to use that as the backdrop. Another way to recycle paper. I cut out some foam board, then applied some double-sided tape to the back of it, and then put the maroon paper on top. A little bit more double-sided tape, and then I was able to secure the hand-laid paper in place. Once the foam was in the back, I was able to secure it with my framing point setter. So what do you guys think? I wasn't quite sure about the ebony stain at first, but I think it's growing on me. A picture frame made from the frame that was used to make paper. The paper was made from the wood from the frame and then put in the frame. That makes sense, right? A special thanks goes out to Alex Harris over at Thiswoodwork and Steve Ramsey of Woodworking for Mere Mortals. They gave us the idea to build something that represents the area in which we live. Thank you guys, I really appreciate that, and you can find their video links right here. Well, that's all I have for you this week, so until next time, I'll see you next week.